Mauricio, welcome to the second conversation in within the IDEA program. And I suggest we begin by you introducing your practice within the field of music, since it's quite diverse, I believe.
Yeah, well, my name is Mauricio Valdés, and I'm a composer, I'm a media artist, and I'm a promoter, cultural promoter, and I also do some software design and technical support for many kind of music. My education was the traditional composition bachelor in music, but then I drift to music technology in my early 20s. I think I took a strong decision to dedicate mainly to things that have to do with music and technology. So during this time, I was working with orchestras and ensembles and that kind of a environment. But then I realized that my path was more about diversifying the profession that I was taught to do. So I started improvising with the computers on stage, and I started to work also with augmented instruments. But I think one of the things that can be characteristic of my career is that I'm hyperactive, and I'm not really how to say it. I'm not really down to dedicate my life to one form of doing music. So that was something that is sparked very early when I started to work with computers, that I wanted to do as many possible things I could do with them, regardless of the aesthetics or regardless of the school. Like I said, my education was very focused on new complexity, that it used to be called. I don't know if people are still using such a term, but new complexity was something that fascinated me because of the sound. It was something that I really got engaged with, the use of the instruments in different forms and the expansions that computer can bring to them was something fascinating. So think uh, I think most of the things I do were on the edges of the what it was considered to be normal music, and that's the only thing that I haven't lost, probably. I tend to work in these areas where it's more problematic or more difficult to make a living. For some reason, I realized later on that it was I mean, I knew it was marginal in a way, but the challenge was too attractive to not do it. um I've been transiting, like I said, in on and off between instrumental music, improvisation, technology, and also music for videos and cinema, stage arts. So I think that's one of the characteristics of my profession, is that we tend to be not dogmatic or as secular as possible in terms of schools, right? Um, I get very seduced by new ideas. I This is where I get inspired to work, when I see things that are rare from one way or another, whether it's because technicalities or because of the idea itself can be as seductive as, I don't know, one of the masterworks in music history. So I think this can be a way to portray my profession.
Um, you mentioned formats and you mentioned challenges. These are
Yeah.
two of things that I would love to hear examples of, if you could offer.
Well, by formats, I mean there are different logics or different mechanics that operate behind what we hear, and there are things that can be functional and things that can be risky, right? Well, there are many, but let's say I'm focusing on these two primarily. Um, I really like to work on things that are, yeah, that have yeah, based on my profession, I can see, or I think I can see, the reasons behind certain music, and because of this, I can extract, or I can pay attention to the things that are important, not the, let's say, aesthetic. All right. So yeah, formats are very important for me to find. When I listen to a piece of music, I don't judge it because of its harmony or its counterpoint or these things that I was taught to extract from music. But I try to see it as what is the function behind this, and what is the logic of those works that can I find interesting or challenging. So if I find things that I don't understand at the beginning, I try to hold my judgment until I know more about whether either the composer or the music that is behind this, or the reasons why this music exists. And this is a challenge. This is something that I find challenging. I don't like to be in a comfort zone as a listener, neither as a composer. I tend to like to be in uncomfortable situations when I don't understand, and I like to. This curiosity is kind of the elementary, yeah, particle, let's say, of what can trigger my imagination. If I don't find that, and if I dig on that, I immediately move out. I don't make a judgment. I just think it's not for me, right?
Yeah, yeah. But when you say you try to understand the logic behind it, in what sense do you mean that? In the sense of what the composer or performer does, quote unquote, or how the sound itself or the composition, let's say, extracted works, or what do you mean exactly?
I think it varies. I probably can give an example. When I was running a chamber music academy in the south of Mexico, in a state called Oaxaca, we had some musicians that were younger than me. When I was in my late 20s, I was in my late 20s, I got in contact with people who was doing things that I didn't understand. They were improvising in a different way that I used to improvise. For me, improvisation until then was an act of rebel behavior, like don't do it properly. And that was for me, improvisation was kind of a to create a little bit of violence around the scene. So that's what we were doing it when I was in my 20s, early 20s, mid 20s. And then I started to understand that there was an alchemy behind, and it was a full tradition. Although I knew about the tradition coming from the north of Mexico, where have a very Americanized society, I knew a lot about the 60s, 70s, and the kind of a free jazz movement and things that evolved after that. But these other forms of music that I didn't understand, for me, I couldn't understand why it was so structured. Why was a form of improvisation could be so close to what I consider classical or contemporary music. And that was a kind of an eye-opening to my, at that time, when you have few years of experience, you tend to be a bit arrogant and you think you know everything. And especially in the position I was professionally, organizing festivals and bringing musicians from all over the world to a very small, well, relatively small, considering the size of a country, city, and we thought we knew it all. And that was a slap in the face to realize that there were so many things I didn't know and I didn't understand about other traditions that kept me curious to find those things that I don't understand. And I tried to dig on them. This is it can be attached to the tradition of classical music or to new music, whatever you want to call it. But it also happens to other forms of music. I used to consider the music for cinema was stupid or was irrelevant, was something that was under the script or under the plot of a film. So I was not paying attention. But the more I move out from this arrogance that somehow the academy put on me, I don't know if it happens to everyone, but to me it was, I start to be more curious about finding things that I understand and try to understand what was behind. And since then, I start to even listen things that I veto myself to listen, like pop music and things like that. So it was quite an interesting moment to realize that we don't hold all the threads, and we don't understand all the tendencies as we were learned or were taught to think, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that often when you are taught a model of, let's say, listening, or a model of analysis or whatever, then whenever in the moment when it's not applicable to something, the first impulse is to leave it, to move on.
Right.
But yeah, you're speaking about quite the opposite.
Yeah, and I think it's also happening with acoustic music, for instance. Acoustic music for me was very important because when I decided to move out from the tradition and being a continuation of my teachers, which has been probably since the 16th century, the tradition is that your teacher teach you how to do it, and you have a very narrow bandwidth of action. For me, it was very electroacoustic music remove all those elements that we find the anchor to know what's valuable. To begin with, the score. The value that had the score for me until then was absolute, was like the Bible for a very religious person, a Catholic religion person. If there was no score, we get lazy and we tend to immediately reject, and we are kind of declare things that we're deaf, like we're deaf, judging the lack of interpretation on stage, the lack of score, the lack of all those things that we consider in the tradition to be the core value of a piece of sound were removed. So I also found that very challenging. How can you, and of course the audience tends to do that, like we were talking about, if we don't understand it, we just immediately move out and say this is irrelevant, this is nonsense. But it requires a lot of effort to decode, let's say. No, I don't want to talk about Adorno, categorization of the listeners, but I think he's on something about the when we don't have to project as a composer, as an artist, as a musician, we don't have to project how would I do that or why did I do that based on my experience. You can find a very interesting places and very interesting position to be. It's humbling, I guess. And for that, yeah, electroacoustic music was a good school for me. Although I stopped really doing acoustic music in the way that I used to. Again, it's still attached to the tradition. You come to a concert hall and the speakers are on stage. In a few places, you also have somewhere around. But this position between the audience and the performers, or in this case, the speakers, are still the same. So we expect to be entertained. And this expectation usually gets frustrated, because when there's only sound, there's no score, there's no performance, there's no virtuosity, then it's easy to say, this is bollocks, this is nonsense, let's go out. And I like that challenge. For me was very, very attractive. How can you seduce people, or how can you create content that engage the deep listening without those elements that most of the people who were educated in the way I was, and also people who loves music and have no active role in it other than listening, which is supposed to be, again, according with Adorno, the perfect listener. How can we relate to things we don't understand? So yeah, this was a breaking point for my career, digging and dedicating quite a few years to acoustic music.
I see. Mm, you mentioned the standard concert setting, right? But if you think about what you want to still do and what you already are doing with composition, do you ever imagine a different kind of a setting that would allow you, let's say, to do different things? This
Well,
is a big question now, but
no, it's a good question. It's a good question because that's pretty much what I'm doing in the space on which I am now. this is a studio that it was designed to have nothing but speakers around and only one listener. It's not that I argue about the pertinence or the functionality of conventional settings. We are social beings. Being in a concert hall is an important thing. It has been, and I wouldn't say will be, but let's say will be. The fact that you are in a social context, listening to things that you don't understand, it doesn't really allow you to extract what's the cookie behind. And for me, building this studio was pretty much about that. The not all music. This is something I was thinking during the pandemic, during the lockdown at the beginning. This is probably anecdotic, but it fits to the conversation. But back in 2009, 2010, we were doing a Helmut Lachenmann string quartet in Mexico City, in the National Palace of Arts. And it was with our DT quartet. It was pretty expensive concert for a festival like us. And I didn't enjoy anything of the concert. It was a really a big thing. The concert hall was full. Everybody was just, it was 4 ovations, like encore, non-stop. And I didn't like it as a producer. I was really frustrated because I thought, I don't get it why this music is here. Why is this? You go out and you're in Mexico City, in one of the most chaotic places in the world, and you had to listen in a very different way. The same string quartet, I heard during pandemic, I think it was Jack Quartet who recorded a video with a completely different setup. It was with an ambisonic sound system. It was a binaural version. I had the score in my room. I was going through it. And I was thinking, yeah, probably not every single work of music has to do with the social context, with the concert hall. Because, the cameras can show you elements that you cannot see on naked eye when you are in a concert hall with 1,500 people is.
Yeah.
So getting to this kind of a moment that I was thinking of, it would be good to have a place where you can do anything and nobody gives you any feedback of what is, whether what you're listening is worth of paying attention or not. When you see the majority of people around you moving, the piece is either bad or it's too challenging. And then your mind drifts. So I wanted to build a space in which there is none of that, neither the visual nor the social feedback that can allow you to take the easy way out. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think not everything is to be designed to be for a concert hall anymore. Hopefully, this will something. I'm not aiming to replicate this place or this idea necessarily, but for me, it changed. The way that I used to enjoy music was in the context of a concert hall, and I still enjoy it. There's certain works and certain music that I don't imagine listening Bach or anything from the 1817, 1920, let's say first half of 20th century in ambisonics. That wouldn't make much sense, but today's music could be, and musicians from the future could use the loneliness that you could have with a binaural piece on your headphones alone, right? So that's kind of the bet or this is one of the things that the reasons why I stopped doing many other things or lower down many other things that I do, because I'm trying to work on that idea.
And that's the space that you're in.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Round?
Well, it's 2 different formats. We have one ambisonics sound system, which is a sphere of 12 speakers. Then we have a Dolby Atmos monitoring system as well. And we are inviting people to do residencies and explore the space and how to use this. Because also, like I was saying, in acoustic music, it's either stereo, quadraphonic, octaphonic. There are systems that got established, right? And those systems and the people who are doing it tend to be a bit dogmatic about the system they use. And what I wanted to do is to have a more flexible instrument, more cybernetic in terms of Norbert Wiener, that you can switch between them to steer and to change what do you want to do with the space, or the relation between space and time, and your position in the room is fixed. So you're in one spot, and the intentions of the space can be tangible, not an anecdote, like it will happen if you have an octaphonic sound system and you're sitting in the back left or in the front right of the hall, right?
Yeah.
This perception of what does it mean to have sounds here and what does it mean to have it there, it can be completely different. So that's more anecdotic than a tangible or a dimension for creativity. This is why we build this space, is because we want to use this as a tangible and also controllable parameter that it hasn't been possible. Although during the music tradition, it was always there. The immersiveness of sound was since the very early stage of classical music and churches, right? And you can find it until Wagner, and of course in contemporary music. But throughout history, the use of space was an ambition of composers. But today it's a dimension that you can control in a way that can mean something for the listener, not only in the score or as a metaphor. And this is why I'm working with everyone, people who's doing, of course, classical composition, but also people who's doing experimental stuff, even therapeutical approaches that I not necessarily use or practice. But it's interesting to see what people can come up when you offer the tools. And my position in this place is to develop the technologies that they need when they express what do they want to do with such an instrument. We try to call it an instrument.
I just wanted to ask if your approach is actually, it sounds quite like instrument building. I mean, it's it's a system of kind that a very concrete one that allows people.
Yeah, it was very risky because there was not such a format. I was starting and digging, and I've been doing electroacoustic music for 25 years already. It was very early when I started to do this kind of music, but I couldn't find anything that it was so open. I mean, acousmonium is one of the let's say most replicated formats, but still it's something that happened in the 70s, and it's still, if you go to Radio France and you go to see the original one and listen to it, the space is not really important. It's more like the timbre, how can different speakers can reproduce determined sound, and this is kind of the poetic or the relation with the, let's say, an orchestration. When you want to pass a phrase between the orchestra, have different glues or different ways to bond the sound, and this is really nice, but it's not what I was looking for when I designed this. I wanted to use the space as a dimension where you can have even theater for the ears, not only cinema for the ears, like Pierre Henry used to say. I think it was Pierre Henry or Chauffeur, I don't remember. Well, one of those said that there was the cinema for the ears was acousmatic music. I think this could be theater, because you can have things happening and really have a very controllable way to work around the space, and this is fascinating for me, as far as I've been working here for most of the people who have worked.
And probably also mastering it, I mean, gaining control over it is in ways similar to a musical instrument, traditional musical instrument.
Yeah, it should be, but unfortunately, or fortunately for personally, but unfortunately, whereas in music tradition, let's say the evolution between cembalo and piano was an artistic necessity. Yeah. This was something that people need to have dynamics. So the evolution between this instrument was something that composers wanted to have. Ambisonics and Dolby Atmos and all those branding names that have been emerging in the last couple of years are a technical solution. They came without artists needing it necessarily. And the gap between that is where we're trying, not only me, but many other institutions and research facilities are trying to find a way on which artists can use this meaningful with a purpose, not only as a, you know, things can move around, and that's interesting for 10 seconds, probably for a minute, but movement without any intention is just, yeah, it's like reverb or like any other effect. And this is where we're trying to move out and try to offer it in a way that can be a tool. And for that, there's a lot of development, not only in software, but also in things to interact with the computer, like physical interactors, you know, from controllers. Everything is based on stereo. The tools, the software, everything you will find around music technology is based still on even the visualization of the sound in software. It's based on stereo, and that's quite challenging to imagine what can be. How can this become a real instrument that musicians are comfortable in using and not just moving sounds, right?
Yeah, because that often, for example, in classical music, let's say, I often get the feeling when listening to a piece that's done with electronics, we like to say, right? So it's a, I don't know, traditional instrument, electronic. It soon becomes about that, about the fact that there's this other kind of a sound that's used to communicate that that it's there, not.
Yeah, and we tend to move to things where we feel safe because it has been done. And this is one of the problems that I find in many of the scenes that I work with, is the standardization of what is functional.
Yeah.
Not only electroacoustic music or in music made for computers, but also in instrumental music. You know, everybody knows what works today. If you attach to a new complexity and you go to a festival, sometimes the whole program could be one composer, and you will never know. It's difficult to know who's behind, and this is one of the things that I find very rare lately, is what do I know about the person when the piece is over? And I don't want to be too naive about that, but I'm meaning this, that sometimes I would like to get to know anything. Uros Royko, for instance, is one good example for me. He's one of the person that I met in Slovenia even before I moved in, a long time ago on a visit. And every time I hear his music, although it's very diverse, it's always coherent with the person I know. And that's not very easy to find. Normally, even the best composers or the most renowned composers that I have worked with, I know very little about them, or I see very little about the person that I know behind the work because of functionalities. Same with improvisation in many cases. It's strange, or it's difficult nowadays to find someone that can not only have a personal voice, but that there's a fit between what you hear and what you know about the person. But it's not exclusive for instrumental music. I think it's in most. This is one of the critical points on which I think we are somehow in contemporary music. How much do we reflect not only about us, but about society in general? That's one of the bad ends or bad consequences of Adorno, I would say, or the early Adorno. I've been talking too much about him.
Well, you know, nobody else seems to be talking about him around here. So maybe you're.
For the last 100 years, probably not many people.
Uh,
I revisit him often because every time I read him, say I read him every 10 years, I think different. It changed the way I see him or the consequences of his writings. Sometimes I hate him. Some decades I think this did a lot of damage, and sometimes I think, wow, this guy was really thinking about in depth of how pertinent or what is the function of non-idiomatic forms of music.
Yeah, but you also mentioned improvisation now for the second time, and I remember you said in our conversation prior to this one being recorded that you still do improvise sometimes, right? And you mentioned before how your view, let's say, was challenged quite a while ago. So what is it now? How do you see it now when you still do it?
Well, yeah, since I started doing it, this violence that I was talking about at the beginning, or this necessity of disrupt the scene. We were educated musicians. We had the whole, let's say, we did the homework of being musicians, but then we wanted to be on stage and just rock the place down and make people angry, being our teachers being angry. That was fascinating to see, getting them visceral. But then when I started to explore other forms of improvisation that were more interesting, obviously, for many reasons, that was just angry kids playing with mud. But later on, I started to realize that although it's difficult to find a concert on which you can take away something home and reflect on it, when it happens, it's unanimous. Everyone in the room knows it. The musicians knows it. The audience knows it. And you don't know how to describe it. We don't have a symbolism in language to describe it, but we just know the sensations that were going on. And that for me was completely unique. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to make 10 horrible concerts, or 10 or 15 or 20 concerts on which nothing works, just for having this small part of time on which everyone is levitating, everyone is suspended. That for me was the exchange coin of bringing gear, going there, playing with all sorts of musicians from all sorts of levels, people who knows music, people who have no idea about music, but sometimes they brought way more ideas than people like me, right? It was very engaging to get to that emotion on which you can, at the end of a concert, you have no words to say, you just know it was. And it's I don't find any parallel in other forms of music or any other practices on which you can't really say anything, and there's just the emotions were there and you knew everything disappear for a few moments, sometimes for 10 seconds, sometimes you don't know, you lose the floor. That's why I use the metaphor of being suspended, because it's just like floating. It happens rarely, but it's worth it, or it was for a while. Then I probably started to get a bit more experience, and I also started to see that there was not so much improvisation, and I found people who was doing that that gave me these beautiful moments to play with and to listen to them as well. And then I started to realize it was getting sophisticated, like classical composition in a way. And this drift that I think it happened during my time life or during my professional life was quite hard to swallow. It still is. It's very difficult to go and not judge that part. I try to not be judgmental, but on the things that I've been doing for quite some time, it's difficult to not see what I think is evident, that there is a necessity of getting close to the thing that we were fighting somehow when I started doing it. And just like happened with jazz, when it got extremely sophisticated, in my opinion, most of it died. I hope free improvisation finds a new reboot somehow. I see it more in classical music with other forms that are not aligned, but yeah, there are a few examples. It will be too difficult to dig in the head and try to bring names, but there are things that are happening. But this tendency of formalize what it was supposed to be free, it's concerning.
Right, yeah, it's ends up having more limitations than explicitly limited.
Yeah, and common places are happening as much as is happening with instrumental music, written music, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. But since we are speaking about your work as a practitioner, I did want to ask you. We just met the other day at a concert, right, where you were to. I did not hear the piece you performed, so I'm not sure what precisely your role as a practitioner was. But we came to talk about how basically after all the years that you have been doing this, you're still more or less for our space, let's say, the only person to call when you need somebody to do anything a little more complex than track playing. Yeah. So yeah, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean,
See some necessity for the future.
there is a necessity of bringing young people to. It's difficult to imagine the reason why this is not happening, because the tools are there, the knowledge is there. My time, we still had to go to libraries and pull out books and try to get to know things, right? Now everything is available and everybody knows what is needed to learn in order to take a profession, or let's say a side part of your profession, because it's not my profession. I do it when it's needed and with a few ensembles and with the people that I have been working for many years. And it is important to know that a specialization is not necessarily the path. So composers that are around your age or a bit older can see the potential of using tools not only for their own language, but also as a professional development. I have learned a lot doing this. I got sensibilized by music that probably I wouldn't have if I wouldn't have to work with an ensemble 8 days a week or 5 days a week, getting to know the piece, what are the elements that are critical, and also the challenges that involve to sometimes, this is not the case, but many times I have been encountering composers who does or have done pieces with mixed media like video and computers and interactive with the ensemble. They're terrible programmers. They don't know anything. They probably did the workshop of the ear camp for 1 year and they got out a few tools and the software is buggy and then you have to debug it. That can be really a second school, because you have to dig on the imagination of that composer. So it puzzles me that in Slovenia we've been doing this for, I don't know, at least since I'm here for at least 12 years, and no one seemed to be interested, that no technician can read this kind of scores. So technicians can't really follow. Many of them have no education programming, or almost none of them. So yeah, I'm still doing it because I don't want this to disappear from the scene. Not because it's my job, but because I really like this music. I still get emotional. I'm not angry about my education. I just don't do instrumental music like I was taught to do. But it puzzles me to see that there is no younger people that can be doing it, because it is something I wouldn't do. I don't I mean, I wouldn't do now. I would keep doing it until somebody comes in and jumps into doing this stuff. But I think this could bring also a new perspective to younger composers. What is the use of having a knowledge between music and technology, right? Which is evident. It's evident that it's an important thing to do, right? Right, I think.
So what would you say are, let's say, basic skills that you see necessary, so worth investing into, for example, for my generation? Because as I mentioned, you are called quite often, right? For in Ljubljana, Slovenia, you're playing in several festivals, in several forums, I don't know, concerts, projects.
Also with musicians,
The only person that can that can do it. And I think that often people don't really know, don't really distinguish between what is, for example, a track and what is you actually live program, right? So I think it could be interesting for somebody listening to this conversation, if you could describe what are the skills that you are most needed for, let's say, and what are their next stages.
Let's say the most important thing is to have a deep understanding of music, the score. Again, we go in square one. You need to know when you open a score and when you see the intentions of a composer. Forget about the technology at this point. But if you have a good education, but if you have a good grounds for understanding a score, and then they bring you an interactive patch that takes signal from the instruments and so on, there are many ways to solve it. Most of the people, or even me, I tried to teach for many years Max MSP, or now Max 8. I don't know now if it's needed. Of course, 90 or 80% of this music is written with a patch, as we call it in Max. PD, of course, is a free tool, and Max is not free, but it's most of the composers send it in a standalone, as it calls, which is a software that you don't need to have Max. And basic understanding of digital sound, which I think at least 60-80% of musicians of your generation should know about how to digitalize sound and how to bring signals from microphones and record them. Those things are needed. If you're very curious and you have the time and will to learn programming, I wouldn't say Max is the best way to start, but probably Max for Live, which is a light version of Max, can allow you to understand the logic of it. 15 years ago, I would say Super Collider, but now I think it's more for live coding, and it didn't prove to be a solution for Max, although the engine for sound synthesis is way more depurated and is pristine. The sound is way better. But for most of the music, mixed music, as we call it, with electronics and ensemble, are made with Max. So, but it's not so difficult to learn Max. It takes a couple of days to just, sit down and click, and the tutorials are everywhere. There's so many resources around. But let's say these two things are the most important one is to have a deep understanding of music that is written, the score, and the other one is just mess around with Max and PD if you don't know Max. So if you don't have money for Max, or you have a lot of ethical code that you don't want to use pirate software, which I don't encourage at all, because this is a small company that has been run for many years with really few people, and the person who developed is a good friend of mine, so I would never encourage to use pirate software, especially with something that has been so beneficial for so many people and had brought a form of standardization of mixed music and all sorts of music that use loudspeakers. So, but PD is a good solution. The same person who developed Max create PD when Max became a company, so people can have access to that. It's a bit buggy. It's not a company. It crashes. It tends to crash. But at least you can get the logic behind what is the, it's not coding. It's not really learning a language per se. It's just having objects that have a name and have inputs and outputs and goes to different places, and it's really not that. It's cryptic, like everything else. The beginning, it can be exponential, the curve of learning at the beginning, but once you get the logic is pretty fluid. And like I said, the resources and knowledge is public. Everybody can have access to that. And other than that, I don't think it's most of the houses that, in this case, for instance, last week I had to bring all the equipment. So that's something that is important, that to have your own equipment so you don't depend on. Unfortunately, in our country, there's not much of infrastructure for these kind of things in the houses. This is it's 18th century, it's the beginning of 18th century Philharmonia, and they still haven't discovered a microphone. They're still not having anything. So still, it's conservare. That's why they call it conservative music. But yeah, there is a need. I know I work with at least 5 ensembles and many places and musicians, composers that need this, and I've been trying to help as many people as I can, and I've been trying to teach as many people that have close to me. And we have an open position here in my lab to teach someone. We try to bring someone, and for some reason decline it. But the idea is to pass the torch, to someone else, because there is, it's fun. You learn. It's great to know people, and it's a spool. Things just fall down, and I wouldn't say it's the most attractive profession, but it's a nice place to do as a freelancer, and it's good money sometimes. Then,
and there's quite a lot to do. That's what I tried to say earlier. That I think oftentimes, people don't even know that you're there, that you're in a booth or in a,
yeah,
backstage or balcony or wherever it is that they put you.
yeah, yeah, and I'm terrible promoting what I do.
I mean, yeah, and it's not, you do your job, right?
Yeah, it's a job. Exactly. That's another thing that we're afraid. It's good that you mention it. I remember when I started doing these things, I was starting to transcribe scores from old composers who didn't know how to digitalize the scores. My teacher was furious because I was helping other composers to promote their music.
Mm.
And this is another thing that probably is happening, that many musicians are still in the path of 18th century education, that the teacher tells you what you're supposed to be doing when you finish.
Mm.
And this fear is poison. It's poison because it limits your career. And if there's anything I can say to younger people, is don't be afraid to do whatever you think it's going to enrich your life. All those things are stories that are in books. All of them are, like, every story is a lie. None of them exist. It's just a construction, huh? And at the end, you don't have to do anything they tell you. You can do whatever you want, and if you diversified, your life will be more entertaining, and it will not be, you're not going to be following or extending the the reputation of anyone. That's just in books. That's not the real world, I think. So if that's the reason that younger generations are still having the fear I had when I started to flirt with technology, then I don't know why we have internet or what is the internet, because we should know that this is just BS.
I see. Um, but if we're now speaking sort of in what is the necessity of the field, right? In your view or from your position, right? Can we also speak about what are some of your compositional, let's say, dreams, ideas that are yet to be realized or that only exist in your mind for now?
Oof.
Or that you perceive as a necessity for that matter, right?
Yeah, well, as you know, because we work together, and I really like to still create a little bit of violence. And for me, the creating pieces without score is very, very seducing still. Something that I haven't done, like the piece, I think the last piece I wrote was for you, for
The
this. Yeah, this is like
Slavonic
great.
as the
No, I
title.
did one with Tilen as well, Tilen Leba.
I see.
So, but anyway, this is something I really like to explore more. I really think that um, the sound is more important than the graphic. And just like in language, like what I was saying, that we don't have words to describe what happens in a good set or a set what everybody knows. We still don't have a good translation of musical ideas and the score. Although scores are beautiful than ever, they're great, they look fantastic, and most of the times don't sound as good as they look. And this is because I think there is a gap between the graphic development and the language that we can use to describe sounds. And because of that, it's something that I would like to retake. At this moment, I put it on a low fire, just like improvisation. I do it for myself and I explore. I'm composing things for other media, like new media installations and things like that. Um, because of my work and the festival that I'm curating here, this is something that I don't do as I used to do, which used to be my main area of work for some years. But now I think I'm gonna stick with this journey of immersive sound formats and technology development. But I would love to have two me's and one of them composing, but really it's a lot of time, this job. And it's also good to take time and stop doing one thing. There's another thing that I learned, that if I take a few chunks of time to dedicate and focus to one form of doing music, then I enjoy when I come back. If I
Yeah,
do it just because it's a survival mode, uh, that's why I also make festivals, because it's also good to be on the other side and not go to concerts to judge my colleagues. And this elbowing is not my kind of thing,
yeah,
to try to be about me. I don't have that chip, fortunately, I think.
I see.
So when I go back, I have new ideas and I think differently.
But the piece you mentioned, right? Perhaps for the listener to have the context, it did not have a traditional score, as you said. It had a video montage with an audio that served to me as a solo performer, right, as a score. So I was watching the video, listening to the audio, and performing at the same time. But when you mentioned that there's a gap in translating, right, a musical idea to a score, would you say that this was your um, attempt of, let's say, surmounting that gap, or of just acknowledging it's there and not even going there? Do you understand? Did I ask the question
Uh,
correct?
I think no. My answer would be no. My idea was just to invert the amount of time that we have as an interpreters. Uh, when we receive a score from a composer, most of the time we spend a lot of time trying to decode the iconography, the graphics, not only the pitches can go easily, well, it depends, but I'd say the pitches are the most transparent because they're conventionalized, right? You have a convention that can let you know what pitch is in your instrument.
Yeah.
But the other things we spend a lot of time decoding. And I wanted to invert the time between this decoding of symbolic representation of an intention to the sound. So if you remember the process, the first thing I give is just the tape, just the tape, and said, try to imitate as much as you can the sounds you hear on your instrument. And then we start adding pitches and we start to add elements. But I wanted just to, when you receive a score, there are very few sonic ideas. The sonic ideas come after you decode what it means. And then it starts to be, and what I wanted to do is this is the way I imagine the piece. Please try to be as faithful as you can to those sounds. And your education and my education can vary, but it can be something that makes the piece a thing, right? Rather than just, do exactly in this 16.532ths of a time of a measure. Don't know if this is where we should be heading. It was funny, it was great in the 70s and 80s, but today I don't know if this is pertinent to put the musician on the limit of something that is absolutely extreme and the boundaries of what the instrument can do. I'm more I'm leaning more to think about, this is an honest statement, this is how I imagine the sounds, there is no representation of it. I can give some scores and I can give some pitches and I can give some spectrograms and types of analysis that can give you more tools, but at least what is the intention in sound at the beginning. That for me was the core idea of this migration cycle. To just, also as a musician, we need to have a deep listening experience at the beginning of what do we think this would be the intentions of a composer. I would say it's more intimate, the intention, than to create a statement or anything, but it's how to promote to listen in musicians, instead of just like, oh, I have to make, if I'm playing a violin or a viola, what do I have to put a piece of fabric here and a paper there and the tuner and scordatura here? That kind of stuff, it can be, I don't know if it prove in time to be a solution, but I'm not the one to judge it. But I thought it would be good to just offer the musicians to sit down, listen, and think, oh, I can do that, or it can be fun, or that would be nice to. And I really like your approach because, again, I heard your technicalities stepping on top of that, and that was a fascinating approach.
Yeah,
very nice.
A very new thing for me to do. It was also a while ago now, so for me that was really one of the first pieces, let's say, out of the curriculum.
Yeah, it was your version of the piece, and it was great.
Right.
Really nice.
Um,
I did one for Urshka as well, for harp recently, and it was, yeah, as well. This is one of the things that I really like and admire about Slovenia, is the level of execution of music is incredibly high, and not many people is saying that. We tend to be very cocky from the compositional point of view, like, oh, they didn't deliver it. Well, the score was way better. I don't think that's the case here. To be honest, the ensembles, the musicians, the newer generations are always incredibly good performance, and this is I think very, very impressive.
right. As we are slowly approaching the end, and we did reach, I think, a nice point. Still, I want to know, is there anything that you think is important, and we didn't get to it? Perhaps something that's completely unrelated to anything we spoke about. I just want to give it a chance to.
Well, I think we cover a lot of fields. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Really happy and flattered to be considered for this chat and conversation. I think you guys are doing a great job. I say this privately and publicly. You guys bring a very fresh perspective of what music was supposed to be about in our scene. And although many people complain about the young being taking over, I love it. I think it's good. I think it's great to have more players in the field, and the amount of performances and activities, workshops, and production you guys are doing is staggering, considering the amount of years you've been doing the craft. So yeah, the only thing I have to say is congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the conversation. Sorry?
That would be the footnote.
Right, right. Well then, until next time.
Thank you, Brina.